Okay, we're going to get started. There's plenty of seats. Come on in if you just came in. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the Art Lecture Series, Week 4, Winter 2019 edition. Before I introduce the goings-on for today, I just want to let you all know, if you haven't seen yet, that the Art Lecture Series has a website, which is blogs.evergreen.edu/artist lecture series. It's actually art lecture series, because it's not only artists who speak to us, but anyway, old address. And you can see here the schedule for the quarter, and upcoming lectures, week 6, 8, and then special on an odd week, week 9 in the evening. But these are all Wednesdays, Wednesday mornings, 11:30 to 1, and week 9, we have March 6th in the evening, I think 7 p.m., yeah. This is a lecture that is open to all. Bring your friends from on campus or off. We have then individual bios and information about all of the speakers that go on the site. And also, the most exciting thing of all is if you ever miss one, you can go up here to Video Gallery, and it'll take you to YouTube playlists. And the lecture recordings go all the way back to 2012. So there's an incredible archive treasure trove of materials that for you to study as part of your practice here. So it's an incredible resource. Please take advantage of it. They're amazing, amazing lectures that go way back. And I'm going to invite up Vuslat D. Katsanis to tell us about a special artist lecture this Monday that is not in the regular schedule, but we wanted to make sure you all knew about it.
I come as two. Yeah, I come as two. So Erdenay and I are very excited to announce that on a very short notice, we've been able to secure a visitation by an Iranian artist based in Iran from Tehran. She's flying in, I think tomorrow, but Monday she will be here, February 4th, from 1 p.m. until 3 p.m. here at the recital hall. She is a visual artist and curator. Yeah. Works across multiple media, like photography, installation, video, and most recently she does what she calls social art practice, engaging with issues and environmental concerns and social political concerns. So hope to see you all here. What is it? Yeah.
Okay, now I would like to just say a few thank yous. I should tell you who I am. I am Julia Zay. I'm media and art faculty, and I am emceeing the art lecture series while Shah Osha, who it usually runs these things, is away on a much deserved, I keep saying this, sabbatical. I wanted to just say some thank yous to Shah for setting up the things that are happening here in terms of the artists, also to Julie Ron, who takes care of all of the communications with the lecturers and the paperwork, and all of the staff in media services who make sure that this is recorded and amplified, and that the artists have the right conditions to show their work, and also that then the videos go up online to YouTube for us to use them. So thank you very much to all the people who make this happen. Yeah. And I also, I just thought it would be fun so you could know who's your neighbor in here. I wanted to say who's here today. There's several programs here. First, the program Repair, Sustainability, and the Art of Social Practice, faculty Karen Gall and Evan Blackwell. The German program, Kathleen Amon, Vuslat D. Katsanis, and Laura Citron. Some students from MediaWorks are here, faculty Suri Tofignia and Ruth Hayes, and students from 3D SOS, faculty Julia Hynexius, and students from my program, Studio Archive Field. So we have a lot of people represented in the mix, coming from a lot of different directions. And it's helpful for our visitors to know kind of who's out there and what you're up to. So when you ask a question, you can introduce yourself and say what you're studying right now. Sometimes that can be really helpful for a speaker to hear kind of the context you're coming from. So in the spirit of that, we have a lot of programs converging here, and it's a lecture series, but it is also very much a classroom. And so in that spirit, treat the space as you would a classroom. Stay till the end. We will have a shift from speaking to Q&A, and the session is a whole session, so please don't get up and leave after the speaker speaks. If you need to slip out because you need to use the bathroom, get water, if your phone rings or something, you can do that quietly. There are doors in the back, and if you're kind of in the front, you can, maybe don't want to be here, but you can slip out over in that direction. And so in the spirit of that, also being a classroom, there's a time for exchange and dialogue with the speaker after they speak. So please feel entitled, emboldened, and welcome to come with your thoughts and ideas and your questions and engage with the speakers. These are always really lively and wonderful discussions. And I think almost to a person, speakers afterwards, our visitors say, God, those Evergreen students are amazing. Amazing. The questions, the conversation. So I love that. I love hearing that. So good work, you guys. So what we're going to try this quarter and see if it sticks is after the speaker speaks, we're going to pause for about 5 minutes so the speaker can catch the breath, and so you can just kind of sit and look back through your notes, collect your thoughts, and see if you can formulate a question or a comment, or at least just kind of shift gears a little bit into the kind of next phase. And there will be, during the Q&A, microphones. There'll be a person on each side, and if you raise your hand, then they'll come to you with a microphone. They can be intimidating. Don't worry about it. We need you to use it so everyone can hear, and also so on the recording, so it can be on the recording. No one will know who you are, so don't worry about it. Your question will be immortalized, though, so don't be shy. So I'm going to introduce now Ruth Hayes, who is media faculty and an animator, who is going to introduce Vivian Hua, who is our esteemed visitor and speaker today. Thanks, Ruth.
Hi, thank you. I'm very happy to introduce Vivian Hua to you today. Vivian, just last October, stepped into the role of the executive directorship of the Northwest Film Forum in Seattle. This is fortuitous that we were able to bring her in because Suri Tofigny and I are teaching MediaWorks this year in the quarter. This quarter, our focus is on community media. Students are working in community and around the ideas of creating media that supports community. And as I've been reading through, there's a wonderful interview with Vivian on, I can't remember the name of the publication, but it was on the occasion of her coming into this role in the Northwest Film Forum and the executive directorship of it. She made the comment that film is a tool of empathy. This idea that we can use media to create empathy among communities and create communication. And as I looked through her career, and you can see in this little bio that's here on the website, it's really clear that Vivian has been focusing on all of these different ways that the arts and performance and film can enhance community. And most recently, she's been investigating ways that uses of public space also help the creative arts and building community. So I know that she's got a lot to say, lots of really interesting experiences, and I look forward to hearing what she has to say. So Vivian Hua, thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Ooh. Thank you to Ruth and Julia and Evergreen for bringing me out here. I think this lecture is going to be pretty far out, so I'm happy to do it at Evergreen because I feel like it wouldn't fly at all places. Let me see if I can figure out how to make PowerPoint work, though. Anyone? Okay, cool. So, my name is V, or Vivian, or if you'd like to make my grandma happy, Hua Ting Ting. In preparation for this lecture, I was given very little in the way of rules or parameters to work with. The only prompt I got was, the content is up to the artist, but it's helpful for students to hear about the thinking and process that goes behind the work. So as someone who's a writer, a filmmaker, a community organizer, and an arts administrator in my mid-30s, taking an hour to talk about my creative process is kind of a crapshoot. But due to the fact that I recently just started working on this 4 days ago, what you're about to see is a reflection of myself at this very point in time in my creative life. So reference points, one thing that struck me about looking at previous speakers and lectures on the website was that a lot of them were very, very academic. Mine is not at all, because I would not consider myself an academic, more a facilitator. And growing up, I was never great at school, much to the chagrin of my Asian parents. The struggle is real. And when it came time to go to college, my grades were rather terrible, and I wasn't really able to get into any California schools of note. So I found myself at University of Washington because they really wanted that out-of-state tuition money. And I found myself in Seattle. And this was during the early 2000s when everything was kind of different in terms of college. I didn't think I could pursue a career in the arts. And so I floated around for a while trying to figure out what was right for me. Eventually, in my junior year, I settled on the Law, Society, and Social Justice track of a sociology major, and then I realized, oh, I'm not actually an idiot, I'm just not good at school because I didn't care about any of the classes I was taking. So I came to discover then that the educational system as we know it has flaws. It tends to award certain types of knowledge over others, and often is viewed through a lens that is rather patriarchal and predominantly white, while not necessarily recognizing others. So in my talk today, I would like to recognize two types of knowledge that have been pretty central to my life. And that would be, firstly, the wisdom of everyday humans, and mystical and esoteric knowledge. So I'm going to start with the wisdom of everyday humans, because that's a bit easier to tackle. If I had to trace it back, I guess I would start with growing up in New York City in the late 80s and early 90s when crime was pretty rampant, poverty was pretty rampant, and arguably it got kind of comical at times. I think this era is where the trash headlines first emerged. This is like straight out of The Onion, although it was real life. So we have formative moments in our lives that really inform us for the rest of our lives. For me, one of those was growing up in New York and stopping at a red light with my family and a homeless man coming up to wash our car windows. And my parents, who were Taiwanese immigrants, were really fearful about what they did not know, and no doubt at the time made some kind of classist, racist comment about the man. And I distinctly remember my brother and I in the back seat rebuking them for what they said, and because as far as we could tell, what was the problem? Like, he was trying to make a living washing our windows at the stoplight. Our response was obviously an oversimplification of a complex matter, but whether it's nature or nurture, it's kind of stories like this that have served to heighten my interest and curiosity about strangers and their stories. But I also want to get real. What I think played perhaps an even greater role for me in terms of listening to people and their stories was that I learned from my own personal experience within my household that nothing is ever really as it seems. People's life experiences are full of things and skeletons in the closet, so to speak, that no one really necessarily knows about. So for myself, my family was kind of full of all kinds of trauma and abuse, sexual, psychological, physical, all that. And so I learned from an early age that you can't really know what is going on in people's lives without knowing their stories. It took me many years before realizing that art, and specifically writing, was my way out of working through those traumas. And I realized that this is a lot about my personal life right off the bat, but I'm telling you this because this kind of life experience is what has kind of shaped the backbone of myself as an artist and as an arts administrator. And also feeds into my endless curiosity about people and the stories they have to tell. Which leads me to my early experiments in talking to strangers. In 2001, when I was 18, I somehow convinced a bunch of my friends to go with me to San Francisco to sit outside of an Old Navy for hours and hold up a sign that said, "Talk to us." I'm not sure if you can read that, but I found it to be more my thing than the free hugs movements that later popped up because it was less transactional, more intimate, or maybe I just wanted to like dig through people's brains, I don't know, whatever. The one time I did experiment with free hugs, however, was in Japan. I joined these strangers in Harajuku, and I decided I wanted to charge 1 yen, which is 1/100th of a cent, rather than give out my hugs for free. It was not successful. Only 2 people wanted to pay me, and I'm pretty sure one of them borrowed money from my friend to do it. So that didn't work. But back to this first Talk to Us session in San Francisco. There were a lot of interesting characters that we encountered, including a very handsome homeless man who impressed me with his generosity because he was coming home from a friend's funeral and had stockpiled cartons of food and was going back to share it with all his other friends. There was also a middle-aged African-American man who ended up hanging out with us the entire afternoon. He sang us little ditties. He assigned each of us career titles. Because I held the sign, I was in public relations. Going down the line, my friend Sherry was sergeant in arms, which I'm not even sure what that means. Jeanette was the leader, whatever that meant, and my friend Claire was also on security detail. He then declared himself to be the CEO of our newfound company, and I made him a little sign that said CEO, which he displayed on the rim of his hat. It was a really basic interaction and a really bizarre interaction, but doing this project, you encounter endless types of stories like this, and it's kind of like a constant reminder that real life can be surreal, that the stereotypical adagios that truth is stranger than fiction, you can't make this stuff up, all that. So this Talk to Us project is now going on for me off and on for 18 years, and it continues to create opportunities for me to engage in deep conversations with strangers from all walks of life, and I find myself having conversations with people that I may never otherwise meet. And it's pretty mind-expanding. And on certain days like this, the day after the 2018 election, it can be a source of communal healing and discussion. On less controversial days, you learn simple things about humans, like the types of people who will engage you and who won't, those who will skeptically say that you're really bored for doing this, and that younger people are often more open to talking to you, as well as very far older people. You also learn that sometimes when you hold up a sign that says "Talk to Us," people, and more people than you would reasonably think that you holding up that sign means that you have the answer to every possible question they might ask, and then they get mad at you when they learn that you somehow don't. It's really interesting. Most importantly, though, I would say that 18 years of interactions like this have allowed me to gain super valuable insight into gender, race, sexuality, all sorts of complex issues from vantage points I wouldn't otherwise occupy. Going back to that first San Francisco outing, for example, the CEO character became fixated on the fact that he was a black man singing to 4 Asian girls, and he asserted the entire afternoon that he felt like he was on stage performing a role, and that passerbyers must have been asking themselves, why is this black man talking to 4 Asian girls? It was as though no matter what was happening in the moment or how authentic our interactions, he could not divorce himself from what others would perceive, that he was a black man talking to 4 Asian girls, and that's not something everyone has to encounter, right? In a later session, a younger African-American man asked me if I was a citizen, and when I replied that I was, he asked me how I knew. I told him I knew because they told me that I was one. And at the time, when he responded that he didn't know if he was a citizen because he was black, I didn't really understand what that meant because I was young. It was the same year that Obama was elected. It was before the whole Black Lives Matter movement and wide publicization of police killings of African Americans. And looking back now, what he said made perfect sense. But at the time, these seemingly minor anecdotes were just anecdotes. And now they've built up to become like a rich ethical foundation for me to kind of do the work that I do at the intersection of arts and social justice. I just generally, I think, find great joy in creating public spaces and events for people to let down their guards enough to express their hopes and fears or their dreams and vulnerabilities. So other ways I've created such spaces have had to do with manipulating the senses. One of the greatest moments in my life was when I discovered this excellently branded and wonderfully named consumer product called the Mindfold. So naturally, I decided to mindfold myself for a 24-hour period. I spent most of that glorious day dancing around my room and listening to music. But the culminating moment was a group outing when my roommates and I went to a nearby Thai restaurant that we went to all the time. The experience was truly eye-opening, pun intended, because the Mindfold promises total darkness with your eyes open. As it turns out, public spaces are really deafening when you're blindfolded. My ears were ringing by the time we left, and I began to think, what would it be like if I were to lead people on a temporary sight removal tour, where they wear a mindfold and are then to indulge in a custom experience of their 4 other senses? So, I got some advice from the Oregon Commission for the Blind and devised a miniature curriculum where I did things like guided people up and down escalators, made them taste 10 variations of oranges back to back, or taught them Braille. I'm not sure if you can read these worksheets, but on the left you'll see that people wanted to do things like not fall down the escalator and hear colors. Then, while still blindfolded, they were encouraged to scribble their insights into that box on the bottom, which they had been shown before they were blindfolded, to see how well they recollected their vision without their vision. This person on the right had a new experience of the commonplace, whereas this person on the right mused, does dill really smell minty? And elevators smell funny too. With all these experiments mounting through the years, I decided to start documenting them on my old website, which is ilovesocialexperiments.com. The site no longer exists because at some point in between I got poor and cheap, but the site itself was a bit of an experiment. I encouraged people to reach out with their own stories, and a lot of people did. Here's one of them. I'm going to read a couple excerpts from it. He said, "Recently, I sent a letter to my pen pal Ingrid. Usually, I attach postage. However, this time I decided to tape on the correct coinage and see if it works. I sent 2 letters, actually, one with correct postage and the coin letter. It worked. The one with coins actually came faster than the correct letter. They had also left the coins on, making it essentially free. It was like committing a crime and everyone helped you along the way." The second clip says, "This last week I went to my college library with my typewriter. I had 2 cameramen in secret positions. I typed in the middle of the library for a whole 10 minutes uninterrupted. Finally, after that period, someone finally confronted me. Quite rude, actually, but understandable. See, I live in the Midwest where people are more reserved with their actions. I wanted to see how far I could take it." So interactions like these, when they happen in real life, I tend to write them up like in the moment and post them on Facebook. And over the past few years, it's been kind of like a shocking regular occurrence for distant acquaintances I hadn't seen in ages to when first thing they did when they saw me would be like some kind of compliment about my Facebook stories. So most of these people were people that I had no idea were paying me much mind at all because they don't comment out online. They're just kind of lurking in the background. So I recently decided to start a storytelling newsletter called Ramblin' with V. You can sign on for it on my website if you'd like. But I wanted to share the story that kicked off the series, which I wrote with the main subject's permission and approval. It kind of coincidentally builds off the through line I raised earlier from the Talk to Us series, even though it wasn't intentional for me to do this. It just shows how necessary these conversations about race are still to have. You can follow along if you can read it. Otherwise, weeks ago, some random email fired my way for no clear or traceable reason has resulted today in the coordinator for the local African American Writers Alliance to, again, out of the blue, invite me over to her house so she can bestow upon me a bevy of leftover Southern food fixins from her oldies party last night, when a bunch of her friends had gathered to feast, dance, and sing on her massive patio. Turns out Georgia, too, is a professed lover of talking to strangers, and boy, does it show. We two freaks bond over culture sharing, politics, and her repeatedly asking me if I need more food in the form of homemade bread pudding and better than sex cake and cabbage and green beans and ice cream I need to turn down because I already had ice cream today, and ribs and chicken I will take for later rather than inhaling myself because I'm not huge into the meats, but I reckon someone at the potluck tomorrow might be. While we chat, she shares what it was like to be one of the first students called to integrate a segregated Southern college, including the slingshot feeling of excitedly asking a receptionist where your dorm was, only to be answered by, "We were only told we needed to go to school with you, not that we needed to live with you." Georgia tells me she was lucky because that comment made her decide to transfer universities immediately. Best decision she ever made. Through the grapevine, she heard later of 2 others who were not so lucky because being the first to integrate meant being angry for years. In the modern day, I learned that a large local bookstore is happy to book the African American Writers Alliance once a year, but even though they're one of the longest running groups to read in that store, they are never guaranteed any slots outside of Black History Month, because apparently Black history and Black writers are only important when a national month dictates as such. Not different enough from those first days of integration. Is California as bad as here, she asked me. Racially, I ask. I know a little bit about that, but apparently I don't even begin to know because I'm not constantly asking that question. That is my privilege. I often wonder who I would be if I didn't have to deal with this, she says with sadness and repeats it twice. It gets tiring. This gets tiring. And I think how, despite having to deal with this and being so tired of this, she continues to give so much. A lifetime of teaching to retire perhaps a bit too early, resulting in finances that are not as stable as they ought to be, and yet she cooks and cooks regardless, to give and give regardless. This massive spread for friends, that massive spread for church, whoever to whatever, and with bounty enough to overfloweth even to me, a total stranger, not just in food, but in time, energy, and vitality. That I should be so lucky to be privy to such a steel-trap memory. That was this past summer, and I can't stress enough how much stories like this shape my vision as an artist and a filmmaker and an arts administrator. So, as Ruth mentioned, 3 eternal months ago, I became the executive director of Northwest Film Forum, which is a 2-screen art house cinema and interdisciplinary community space in the heart of Capitol Hill in Seattle. I just came from Art House Convergence in Utah, which is a national conference for similar organizations. And I will tell you, it's really kind of a rare position for a woman to occupy this role, and definitely a woman of color like myself. Similarly, Northwest Film Forum is a really unique space because even though we show independent films and first run and repertory art house films, much of our programming is not that easily defined. We do a lot of interdisciplinary work, poetry readings, political talk shows, dance shows, anything that fits in our super versatile space. And about a quarter of our programming is either with community partners or is built off of ideas that people bring directly to us, and then we incorporate it into our programming. This kind of open policy allows us to do a lot of grassroots work at the intersection of social justice and film, and our building is a hub for a lot of nonprofits and community groups. We have 4 other media collectives under our roof run by leaders of color, and we subsidize partial space for all of them, and we do this in the name of long-term systemic change towards a more equitable future in the arts. So one example I would like to offer up is an upcoming poetry and translation series where a group of well-known poets in Seattle who are frustrated by the lack of institutional support for their work proposed to us a bilingual reading series. They found that many other organizations were eager to say that they were interested in such a program but didn't actually want to put in the work to make it happen. So it became similar to what Georgia had said about the African American Writers Alliance and their experiences around Black History Month. Everyone wanted credit, but no one wanted to support them from the ground up. So the reason I've shared so many of these anecdotes is, again, it contributes to my ongoing work in this space, and they're really at the core of everything that I do. But to switch gears a little bit, I will say the other aspect, which is mystical and esoteric knowledge and how that plays a role in the work that I make. Way less predictable, I will say. First, I have to acknowledge that I have a fair degree of privilege in my life to be able to be a creative person. And I think anyone who is able to do that should honor that and know that not everyone gets that opportunity. With that, I want to start with the point that everything changed for me in terms of spirituality in my adult life. When I was young, I grew up in a Christian household, and I had done kind of all of the steps of going to church, getting baptized, participating in communion, swearing off sex, etc. And I found myself being turned off by hypocrisy that I saw, that the loudest people were sometimes the people who were doing the most wrong things. So I spent nearly a decade after graduating from high school with absolutely no interest in spirituality or religion, because my mindset was, I'm a fairly logical person, so I was like, there's no possible way we're ever going to know any of this definitively, so I just don't even want to waste my energy on it. But then in 2011, I had this experience at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. And I mean, I should have known what it was about going there, but I actually was embarrassingly ignorant of the significance of it. I didn't even know where it was. I just ended up there. When I got there, I experienced some crazy thing that I've never experienced before and haven't experienced since. While there, it felt like approaching the wall that I could feel thousands and thousands of ears of people dumping their wishes and wills and prayers and concerns into an inanimate object, and that created a palpable physical feeling. The air felt really heavy and thick, and the weight of just other people's sorrows and intense. Looking back on my journals, I describe the sensation as powerful, as a looming presence, a present presence, as though the wall and the energy around it took on a persona of its own. Now, talking about spiritual knowing or spiritual knowledge, it's kind of hard to describe and hard to convince people that what you're saying has validity if you haven't experienced it yourself. I don't know what to say other than that my journals corroborate my feelings at the time. I wasn't looking for that. I was sober. And to read an excerpt from my journal, I describe the experience saying, close to the wall, you could seriously hear wailing from multiple directions, and even so far as multiple people away. Very intense. Everyone has her own style of wailing, of course. Some mumble, some sob quietly, some cry noisily, and it almost puts you in a trance-like state to be there, amongst all these tears and all this sorrow. I didn't have a prayer in mind, didn't even know that people prayed there. But once I got there, I had to. Leaned against the walls and prayed to nobody in particular, to just a universal energy force. And I got mazed, the physical world falling away, and there was nothing but sound and the fury of extending a will. Surrounded by all this sorrow and with no plan in mind, the first words in my meditations were pretty much, why all this sorrow, repeated over and over and over like a mantra. It couldn't be helped. It tumbled out. And then a general wish for people to attain what they wanted, not what they thought they wanted, but what they truly wanted. That human beings as a whole would simply learn to go with the flow, to accept life more readily, and that would yield a synchronicitous reality that made apparent what was wanted and granted it. Beyond this, there were visualizations, a sweeping, swooping, orange-tinted force radiating outwards, scooping up everyone in the wall and bringing them inwards, and then to the entire courtyard, and then to the entire country, and then to the entire world from a globe's point of view. I don't know. I was at the wall, and this was just what came out of me, and it was nothing that I had ever experienced before, and I left being like, what just happened? I don't understand. In the days and months to follow, the 3 months to follow, I felt like I was floating around in a haze, and really crazy things started happening. Things became so crazy that I knew I needed to write a novel. It wasn't that I knew I needed to write it, I just was writing it. It came flooding out of me, and it became called In All Things Patterns. Now, if you've ever experienced the type of feeling where you're thinking about something and then you circumstantially find a book or a movie where that exact sentiment is mirrored back at you, that's the feeling I had for this 3 months on end, day after day, just unbelievable craziness. The term synchronicity comes from the studies of Carl Jung. In 1952's The Collected Works of C.G. Jung, he recalls, a young woman I was treating had, at a critical moment, a dream in which she was given a golden scarab. When she was telling me the dream, I sat with my back to the closed window. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, like a gentle tapping. I turned around and saw a flying insect knocking against the window pane from the outside. I opened the window and caught the creature in the air as it flew in. It was the nearest analogy to a golden scarab one finds in our latitudes, a scarabæed beetle, the common rose chafer, which, contrary to its usual habits, had evidently felt the urge to get into a dark room at this particular moment. I must admit that nothing like it ever happened to me before or since. At the start of this period of my writing this novel, I had picked up Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, and this quote both kicks off the start of my book and the feeling of this particular period. He says, "I am alone. Most of the people have gone back home. They're reading the evening paper, listening to the radio. Sunday has left them with a taste of ashes, and their thoughts are already turning towards Monday. But for me, there is neither Monday nor Sunday. There are days which pass in disorder, and then sudden lightning like this one. Nothing has changed, and yet everything is different. I can't describe it. It's like the nausea, and yet it's the opposite. At last, an adventure happens to me, and when I question myself, I see that it happens, that I am myself and that I am here. I am the one who splits the night. I am as happy as the hero of a novel. Something is going to happen." Again, that feeling that something is going to happen manifested for me as synchronicity after synchronicity, kind of bashing me over the head in such a ridiculous manner that for me, I can no longer deny that there was something more than just my flesh and bone body, even though I want to stress that I really was not looking for any of this kind of stuff at all. The other importance of nausea kind of crossing my path is that I had never really thought about writing a book in the manner that this book is written, which is using personal journal entries as a way of fleshing out a narrative. So finding that this book both mirrored my feelings and also provided the structure for which I could write the novel was also like an interesting coincidence. To say that I wrote the book would be true, it also kind of wrote itself. So here's one excerpt of a synchronicity that happened. This afternoon, Tori and I were discussing the shortfalls as well as the interesting points of the lecture. I took a break from texting to study my nearly non-existent vinyl collection and noticed on the back of one the words, "As above, so below." It was my first time noticing the phrase, so I made a mental note. 2 minutes later, I returned to my cell phone. Tori had texted me his final thoughts on the presentation. "I like his as above, so below idea, though," he wrote. I stopped in my tracks. He called it magic. So to switch gears a bit, from 2004 to the end of 2017, the majority of my life was dominated by running a music and arts publication called REDEFINE. When the publication first started in 2004, its tagline was "Fighting the Independent Fight," because at the time it was when the music industry was still dominated by major labels and the punk attitude was still relevant and felt necessary and appropriate. By 2012, though, the industry had changed immensely due to streaming and digital media, and everyone was basically on an independent label. It seemed like music and arts journalism were slowly dying, as they still are, and when presented with the decision to either quit doing the publication or to go deeper, I decided to take it deeper. Instead of kind of adding fodder to the shallow, bite-sized type of media that are commonplace these days, we strove for deeper articles, but fewer of them. We decided not to critique music and art from merely an aesthetic point of view, but to move on to long-form journalism and multi-thousand-word essays that explore the ways in which artists connected their work with deeper social and societal issues, whether that was literature, politics, or environmentalism. We compared and contrasted commonalities and differences amongst a by interviewing broad stakeholders around one topic, and that resulted in articles such as bilingualism in US indie musicians, the upward trend of Spanish-English lyricism, glitch art, romanticizing analog accident and digital dystopia, and, an especially fun one, The Child in the Mirror, a Nietzschean reading on the myth of Michael Jackson, to name a few. So I spent my entire 20s kind of living and breathing REDEFINE and supporting other people's art. But when I turned 30, I had kind of a burning bush voice of God moment for myself, and it was similar to the experience I had at Wailing Wall, but more personal, more directly impactful. It was basically like a great bolt of cosmic lightning for me, and it's hard to describe other than it meant a lot to me. And what it essentially told me was, you need to direct people to do stuff. And by this, I knew in the moment that it meant to pursue filmmaking seriously and to very specifically become a film director. Obviously, the words don't mean that, but I knew that it meant that. I know this is getting pretty far out into left field, but this is what you get when you give me the freedom to kind of talk about my creative process, I guess. Okay, so back to this idea of you need to direct people to do stuff. People like to ask me the obvious. How do you know that it meant film director? And I just know that that's what it meant. I also, in that moment, proceeded to kind of laugh my ass off about it because I had never considered that before up until that point, even though it seemed like all the skill sets were prepping me to do something like that. Once I made that decision, I decided to follow it with blind faith, and from there, doors just kind of opened like crazy. I had outdated DSLR camera equipment. I decided to apply for a grant to get thousands of dollars of equipment and was instantly granted the grant, even though I learned later on that people had been waitlisting for months. And it was just one stroke of luck. Sorry, I'll get to others later, but I'm gonna play a video clip in the background while we do this. Give me 1 second. How do you do this? Okay, so given my music industry connections, it made sense for me to do live projections for bands as kind of my first half step into film, because it kind of drew upon my graphical background and was still involved film, but wasn't as full-blown as a full production. When I actually tried to make a legitimate music video with a crew and like a storyboard and stuff, I failed miserably because that stuff takes building blocks of skills that I just didn't have at the time. Fast forward a couple years, and at the time when I was still in Portland trying to figure out filmmaking, some close friends had moved to Los Angeles, and it was at this point when a series of psychic dreams started. And if any of you have ever experienced a phenomenon like a psychic dream, it can feel hyper real, super lucid, like waking life in a lot of ways. So the first dream I had was with a friend who wasn't especially close, but he told me a secret in the dream. And I texted him the next day, and instantly he wrote back and said, "Whoa, clairvoyant," and nothing more. When I saw him a week later, the first thing he did was pull me aside and tell me that the night prior to the dream, he had been fixated on and obsessively thinking about the secret that he had told me in the dream. To me, this was outlandish, but it was some kind of evidence, and so I chewed on it. A couple weeks later, I had another dream with his best friend and bandmate, which someone I was even less close to. But in that dream, we were just sitting across the table from each other. It was very lucid and super mundane and boring. And I just talked to him and said, "I'm thinking about moving to Los Angeles." And he's like, "Yeah, you should move to Los Angeles." And that was the entire dream. And when I told him about it, he said he had the exact same dream on the exact same night. So I hadn't experienced that before, but it made me want to figure it out. So in the way that the post-Wailing Wall synchronicities kind of sent me on a tailspin to writing my book, I decided to go around the country interviewing psychics and figuring out what it was that made them tick. So I'm also not talking about kind of the corner store, like neon sign, crystal ball psychic. I'm talking about the types of people who generally get their business through word of mouth. They tend to work at with masseuses and Reiki healers, stuff like that, whether you believe in that stuff or not. In 2016, I culled a lot of these footages and gave a lecture at Nerd Night in Austin, and this is just like a brief clip of some of the similarities I found across the psychic experiences.
So when I first started doing readings for money, there was a guy that was sitting in front of me who was 50. I mean, I'll never forget it because that's the day I got my lesson about it. I mean, I was just starting, and I heard, telling me he needs to play the banjo. I that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm not sure anybody needs to play the banjo, you know, and I don't know what the big deal is about the banjo. I just said, no, I'm not going to tell him that. And then I heard it louder. Tell him he needs to play the banjo. And I go, no, I'm tell him something more important than that. And then it was like screaming at me, tell him he needs to play the banjo. And then I said, listen, I've heard this 3 times, and I just need to tell you, I'm hearing, this may sound ridiculous, but I'm hearing you need to play the banjo. He goes, oh, I've wanted to play the banjo since I was 7 years old. So that's when I got it. That no matter what I hear, no matter how mundane it sounds, how irrelevant it is, there is no irrelevant in a reading. And it's all important. And one thing is not more important than something else. And so my agreement is if I hear it, I will say it, and I will say it in the exact way that I heard it. I will not interpret it. I will not add anything to it. I will say it exactly as I heard it.
I had a gal in here a while back, and I kept seeing an orange, but I knew it wasn't about the fruit. I knew it was about the color. And there's that part of me that says, well, you can't just say what's up with the color orange, right? And what does that mean? So I didn't say anything, and it kept playing and getting bigger and bigger in front of me to the point of it was just giving me a headache right in front of my face. So I finally took that deep breath and went, okay, the color orange, what's up? And she started cracking up. And I was working with her grandmother this day. And when she was in high school, her favorite color was orange because she felt sorry for it. Nobody else had the favorite color orange. She felt like it was neglected, right? And her grandmother used to tease her about it all the time. So for her, it made perfect sense. For me, it means nothing.
And a man came in, I knew he was a total skeptic. He was like a business politician type of guy. And he came in, I said, well, hello, skeptic. And he started laughing. And I'm doing a reading for him, and I'm like, this feels funny. I feel like I'm fishing. I don't like to feel like I'm full of crap. I'm like, why do I keep seeing this old lady with a metal vice on her head? I kept seeing like an old woman with like gear on her head, like medical or gear. And I said, you know, I gotta tell you, I keep seeing an old lady with like a metal thing on her head. And his face just turned white. And he's like, that's my mother. She's in critical care. She just had like brain surgery. I said, okay. And then from that place, I could see how then I give advice or basically he needed to start letting go, you know, and healing his relationship with her. So that's how that reading went.
Okay, so that's that. Through my interviewing dozens of these people, I've learned that a lot of their worldviews were the same, even though they didn't know each other and they got information differently. However, if you believe that, there are a lot of commonalities. So I did eventually move to Los Angeles in part due to the dreams, or definitely because of the people involved in the dreams that I had. And from there, I decided to go to film school for a bit because it seemed like the thing to do. I didn't know otherwise how to gain the skills to become a filmmaker, and I knew I needed to be a filmmaker. So that was in 2016, I guess. And as soon as I moved there and made that decision to go to school, again, it was a series of doors opening. As the aforementioned luck would have it, a friend happened to give me a $10,000 translation project, which I was totally unqualified for, but she gave it to me anyway. And it covered my entire tuition for my 2-year directing program at UCLA Extension. Luckily, though, I was able to spend only half of that because I somehow was able to weasel my way into shooting my thesis without actually finishing the program. Not that I'm telling you to do that in this situation. It would take a long time to detail the steps that went into creating the film, but the long and short of it is that I didn't know the right people to make a fully fleshed film because I had a cast of 8 people and needed a crew of 18, and I really just didn't have the connections. I went to a student meetup, was drawn to a young man who I talked to for 10 minutes, and after we left and had that brief interaction, we both knew that we would be working on this project together. He was a Russian photographer who was there for a couple years, and he connected me with an assistant director who became my right-hand man, and he was able to kind of magically fill in my entire crew and By my estimation, it was the easiest thing ever. I didn't have to hardly lift a finger, although I recently found out for him it was very, very difficult. So yeah, if you ever get into film directing, a key assistant director is very important. The resulting product of this is an 8.5-minute narrative film called Searching Skies. It's about a Syrian refugee family that visits an American family's house for Christmas dinner and the contentious debate that happens across the dinner table over their presents. For better or for worse, it was based off a true story that a friend told me, and I began writing it before the current administration came into office because it already seemed like there was a culture of anti-Islamophobia within the country. When it did finally come out, he had been elected, and I was ready to release it when the initial Muslim ban was announced. A friend happened to introduce me to the former executive director of Northwest Film Forum, who had an idea similar to what I had of doing a discussion series around anti-Islamophobia issues. So together we worked together on a national organizing event called the Seventh Art Stand, which took place in 50 venues in half the states, and basically created a means of allowing people to speak with Muslim community members about their experiences and use film as a medium for doing that. For a lot of people, that was literally their first time ever meeting a Muslim person and seeing, hey, they're real people. That project directly led me to being hired as a graphic designer at Northwest Film Forum, and a year and a half later, I am the executive director there. So, I don't know, it's been a super insane journey, and so when I talk about my process, it's hard to kind of distill it in a simple way because it is so much following a path that is personal to me. So in coming here today, I kind of struggled with how to talk about that and to openly talk about that, but I didn't know how else to approach it. So I would say that the takeaway advice for you all is that it doesn't really matter what people tell you you should be doing. You should be doing what makes sense for you to be doing or what feels right for you to be doing, and to check in with yourself to make sure that that's the voice you're listening to and not everyone else's. I want to close this with just showing you that 8.5-minute film, and after that, I look forward to having a Q&A with you all. Thank you.
I don't know why you make me come to stuff like this. Like, are they even allowed to celebrate Christmas?
You're being ridiculous.
I knew I should have gone to Dad's.
Were you invited? Hey, Bill.
How are you?
I can't.
You have opened your home to us, so thank you. Thank you. I really cannot thank you.
So glad you made it.
That must be your famous nephew, Derek.
How you doing, Uncle Bill?
Oh, I'm so glad you made it.
Good to see you.
Hamza, this is the famous nephew I'm telling you about. Derek, this is Hamza.
Very nice to meet you. Your uncle has told me a lot about you. And I hear that you're in university.
Yeah. I'm studying economics.
You know, back in Syria, I was a professor, and I did a little bit of economic studies. How are you liking it? أميرة، تعي سلمي على ابن أخته، بيكون ديريك هذا الصغير اللي دايما بيحكي لنا عنه.
Hi, Amira.
Hi. Excuse me.
Why don't we all go and sit down?
Yes.
Okay.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's right. That's right.
We have to share with you, and I was talking to my family now, that this is the favorite time of the year for us. And in Syria, always, everybody gathers around the table, the families, and everyone's celebrating and going out and dancing and music. It's wonderful.
Huh. Who would have even thought that Muslims celebrate Christmas?
Oh, yes, Damascus is a very diverse city, and most of our friends are Christian.
That's nice.
But unfortunately, it's very different now. People are always living in fear, and they are too scared to leave their homes. They're worried that they might get kidnapped or shot or killed, end up in prison, and nobody will ever find them.
Thank God that you're here now. And this is just a start. But a member of our congregation just got Hamza a job at her catering company.
Yeah, but why work if the government's just giving you money anyway?
So, how are you enjoying your first American Christmas?
Oh, we are so grateful for your hospitality. We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And thank you for all of this and your help.
The pleasure is all ours, truly.
No, I don't want any. I don't want any.
Calm down. Derek's just mad because we didn't bake his Christmas ham this year.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you remember when? Now, Derek would have been about Fatima's age, 15, and we decided to surprise him by baking him an enormous ham. It was horrifying. He ate almost the whole thing in one sitting.
He could eat back then, I'm going to tell you that right now. He earned his nickname, the human garbage disposal.
I bet I could still do it, too.
I agree.
I don't know how you stay so skinny, but I'm always trying to eat the salad and the vegetables, and look at my belly sticking out. And I know Amira does not approve. هو بيحب فخدة الخنزير كلها، فآخر مرة عملوا له إياها أكل الفخدة كلها لحاله، عم سموه زبالة الأكل.
Why couldn't we just do the salmon for them and then the ham for us? Okay, this isn't Syria.
Derek,
What?
you can't just say that.
I'm serious. You shouldn't have invited them here.
Sorry?
It's Christmas, man. It's not even their holiday.
That's why I thought the least we could do is show him some hospitality. And then you show up, acting like a perfect jackass. You know what they call her in school? A terrorist.
What do you expect?
You know, one of my last days in Vietnam, we were assigned to this convoy escort. And we're rolling down this road. And this wave of Vietnamese is coming towards us. It's women and kids. And everything they own is strapped to their backs. And I'm thinking, that's it. They lost it all.
And I get that. I do. But that doesn't make this your problem.
Oh, what do you know what is my problem and what isn't?
Look,
you weren't there.
I know, but Dad told me all about these people, okay? And their religion. It's all backwards.
Does he even know a single Muslim?
That's not the point, okay? Did you see the way that lady was dressed in there?
That bothers you?
Yes, that bothers me.
Try watching your classmates getting blown up by a car bomb. Try being tortured.
Oh my God, listen, you're not listening to me, okay? What I'm saying is I am sick of you and Mom and whoever else telling me what I should and I shouldn't feel. What I can and I can't think. What about me? I can't even come home to what's normal. But I'm supposed to sit here and pretend to care about their family. Pretend to care about their religion, their culture. I mean, we're such a perfect...
Okay, I guess I'm up here if people have questions.
I've been thinking about how you talked about the psychics and I mean just sort of the inexplicable other world experience and oh anyway I'm Joseph Pratt from the German program and I thought to myself in the early Weimar Republic, I mean, film was viewed much the same way, just simply kind of as a portal to another world, to another reality. And also, I mean, given that we generally do live in such different realities, I mean, I'm not surprised that, I'm sad to say, that that the man in the video you just showed was not able to understand and what the Syrians went through because he has no experience or context. No experience and very little context for it. Mm-hmm. Or it's so I mean, have you worked with any? So, you said that this is based off of the true story, right?
Certain parts of it, yeah. The plain part. So my friend's family had helped resettle a Syrian refugee family through their church, and they invited that family over for Christmas dinner. And over the course of Christmas dinner, a plane flew overhead, and the kids who were around the same ages kind of freaked out and ruined Christmas.
Yeah. Did you ever meet the family yourself?
I did not know.
Oh.
But the actors in the film are actually Syrian refugees themselves, although they left before it got really bad. Thanks.
Hello. Ooh. Yeah, I'm just curious to know, it sounds like you've worked up and down the entire West Coast in the media industry for a long time now. So I'm just kind of curious to know how it's different in or if it's different at all in the three different areas. It sounds like LA, Portland, and here in Seattle. So yeah, I'm just curious to know, how are they different, or if they're not different, what it's like, basically.
Which type of media are you interested in? Like film or?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously LA has all the stuff. Yeah, I would say that is the place to go if you want to make it in kind of like Hollywood. Mostly everyone who works out of Seattle, if they're trying to work in that way, they travel to LA all the time. Portland has some productions as well, but I would say both of these cities, we don't have great like tax incentives, so not a lot of people make like large scale movies here.
But what about in Seattle, though? I mean, I know there is media in Seattle, not necessarily Hollywood, but I mean, there is media here.
There's a lot of really amazing filmmakers in Seattle,
Yeah.
actually. It's just, yeah, the problem is kind of getting it to that next level has been sort of difficult. Maybe some people don't care about that, but yeah, in terms of like a healthy, robust ecosystem where people can actually make a living off of it here, it's not huge.
Okay.
But it is possible for select people. Thanks. There's a human behind you.
Just to put it to scale, how many hours do you think, just with that short film in general, how many hours do you think went into it, like physically shooting it and then editing afterwards?
So shooting itself was 3 12-hour days. And most of it, other than the outside scene, was at daytime. So we blacked out the windows and made it look like nighttime. The pre-production took like 3 months of just like meetings and scheduling like the shoot location, figuring out props, figuring out cast, all that stuff. Maybe even more than that. And then scripting it probably took 3 months, and editing it took 3 months. I don't know about hours, but it was a lot of hours. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
My name is Sylvia. I'm part of Studio Archive Field. I study gender genealogy and grief and how it works through the body, as well as poetry.
Cool.
I'm really interested in what you said about choosing to have a conversation instead of giving free hugs, and how that was less transactional and more of an intimate experience. If you could say more about the reciprocity that exists in the relationship between subject and art maker, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
In that context of those conversations?
In the context of that conversation, as well as the general scheme of the art world and artists who try to do it ethically and try not to exploit their subjects for their story, and how you go about navigating, again, your relationship to your subjects.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation. I feel like in the context of the Talk to Us sessions, it was very open in terms of like people would approach us. We wouldn't necessarily harass them. So it was very like they came on their own volition and shared what they wanted to share. There was like no real guidance or anything like that. And we found just like a lot of people really just wanted someone to listen to them. In terms of documentary filmmaking and stuff like that, that's been a conversation I feel like that is pretty nascent compared to maybe in the art world, because documentarians, even though they have the permission of their subjects, I feel like it's only recently that I've started kind of seeing people being like, but like, how can we have a subject on camera who's like crying and like clearly in pain, and we're just kind of ignoring them for the sake of the story? It's hard to say. Like I've been trying to get permission in kind of like all aspects. Like for example, in writing that story about Georgia and going over to her house and being given food. Like those stories that I'm sending out, I'm asking people beforehand. Like I'm showing them, can you see it? Like here it is. Is this okay with you? Do you have any changes? And one guy like wanted to offer his own like counter perspective of what happened. So that's kind of interesting as well. Does that answer your question?
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm also from Studio Archive Field. Thank you for being here. And my question, I kind of want to know a little bit more about your studies in esoteric knowledge. Specifically, I'm just kind of thinking about the continuity between you wanting to have these sort of random occurring conversations and learning from these sort of random experiences, while also thinking about spirituality and like that's kind of like relying on the outer or unplanned experiences like going to the wall and stuff like that. So I guess my question is, why do you like gravitate towards these kinds of experiences? Like, why is that better for you than like a planned idea or like really thought out things and like really relying on this randomness? Like what's the benefit of learning in that way, I guess?
I mean, I don't think this is, thank you for your question. I don't think this is obviously true for everyone, but for me, like the few times in my life where I have sat down and been like, this is my 5-year plan, or even as far as like 1 year out, like I was actually planning to move to New York and had an apartment lined up before I moved to Seattle, and it's like, here's this just crazy curveball. So sometimes life just doesn't work out the way most of the time. Planning doesn't work for me, and I don't think that's the case with everyone, but I think possibly if that's the type of energy you're going for and the things you want to happen, like just kind of random chaos, it might happen. I don't know. Did you have a follow-up? I mean, I would say in the sense of like kind of controlled chaos, I do a lot of tarot reading, which is, it's this very like fascinating thing that is always accurate, even though I can't think too much about how it works because then I go crazy. But I just know that it works, and it works not just for myself, but for people I give readings to, like that a reading I give to someone is not applicable to like the next person in the same specific way that it is applicable to them. I would say that's like my kind of main source of knowledge. I do read stuff here and there, and but I wouldn't say I subscribe to any one like kind of way of thinking or anything like that.
I'm gonna try to project. Going off of that, how do you and kind of melding these different aspects of your life, or was it just really a matter of just like putting both feet in and going with it, and it was pretty easy once you did that?
I would say a little both. I think for me, I was fortunate because I never really like, I tried to do like the 9-to-5 job thing a little bit, and I was like, not gonna do it, not my thing. And ended up freelancing for a long time, which allowed me kind of the space and the time to pursue things in a free way. And I do think having the freedom is a privilege and a means of being able to kind of pursue a spiritual path. And the other thing is just believing, like if the message feels resonant to you, like putting faith in that, because it isn't like the struggle is that it's not necessarily going to be immediate, and it might seem like the doubt is like I'm a little crazy maybe, but then it works, and then you're like, okay, well maybe I'm not that crazy because it's happening the way I thought it would. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Ryan. I'm with the MediaWorks program. I was curious because you share a very highly personalized story and kind of like progression leading up to this point that revolves around a lot of personal choices and kind of gut instincts. And you've experienced a lot of kind of success or luck with that. What about any self-doubt or roadblocks that you've encountered on this journey, and how have you kind of overcome these struggles?
I mean, I really think the largest roadblock is what I just mentioned, like the trusting in this super not traditionally accepted means of knowledge or way of being, and just having that conversation with myself about like what is the type of person that I actually am, because I would love to be like sometimes like a normal person, that like has like a very rigid schedule and like can plan in advance 5 years. It seems kind of nice, but like having that kind of being like, okay, well, this is not who I am at this time. This is not how things are happening for me at this time. And whether you like it or not, like just kind of accepting it and then going with it, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm from Studio Archive Field. I'm just curious a little bit about your research process, like for searching skies, for example, like what's your research process look like? Like, is it interviews or like curious?
It was a lot of reading to start out with, and then after kind of getting all aspects of like, here's what people are saying against Syrian refugees, here's what people are saying like for them being here, and then what are the circumstances with which people enter the country, like the legal repercussions and the process of actually being a refugee and all that, and then bringing it to members of the Syrian and Muslim community and finding out if it's resonant, if it's accurate, changing the script and like customs according to what they're saying is actually like relevant. And being open to that. Like some of the lines in Arabic, like the actors came up with themselves just to make it more authentic. And also going through an Arab American casting agency and making sure they were Syrian because it's a very specific dialect and all that cultural norms.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. I was wondering what the reception, what sort of reception you got from Searching Skies, especially coming out at the same time as the 2018 election.
It's been generally pretty good. What I think is the most fascinating part for me is people's reactions to the young man vary greatly based off their own experience of that type of character in their lives. So people who may have been personally affected by that type of character are like, oh, I just want to punch him in the face. And then some people who may have friends that are like that person are like, oh, well, I totally understand where he's coming from, and this is like an authentic perspective that I think a lot of people who live on the coast may not understand as clearly as like someone from Texas. Like I recently had screened this film somewhere, and this guy's like, yeah, where I was growing up, someone would be angry about that ham in that way. They would probably bring their own ham. Whereas like sometimes I feel like those nuances are maybe a little lost amongst populations that don't intersect in that way. But generally it has been pretty positive, yeah, feedback. And I think one cool thing to come out of it is a lot of discussions with teenagers and stuff like that as an educational tool.
Hello, my name is Natalie. I'm the arts and entrepreneurship staff here. I just had a quick question. Being an arts administrator and now a film director, doing some project planning, managing funds, being a freelancer, what keystone skills did you need to develop and how did you do that?
Is there a specific one you want me to expand upon? Because I guess being able to work on multiple things at once and not like forcing timelines that aren't going to happen. Like giving yourself ample room. Like for pre-production on this film, I had like 4 months and just was like, it's just gonna be this long. I know that I want it to be shorter. Like I would like it to happen overnight, but being realistic and approaching it in that way. What else? Juggling, wearing all the hats and juggling.
I had a couple questions. I was kind of curious if there were like 1 or 2 important things that you learned in the production of this 8-minute short that you wanted to share. And then I was wondering what kind of projects you're working on or hoping to do next.
What did I learn? I learned a lot. Is there like a specific angle you would like to learn? I learned that film is really expensive. That film cost me $15,000, and I crowdfunded most of it. It's ridiculous. And then I also learned that Google spends that in like 2 seconds to make an internal video. So that's like the discrepancy we're up against in independent film versus corporate media. It's ridiculous. As far as projects, I'm working on a VR project and also scripting kind of a TV sitcom that's a little bit like Broad City, but having to do with kind of 2 girls falling into spirituality and trying to figure it out. Cool, thanks. Secrets. No, that's not the name, that's the...
Hi, I'm curious.
Hi.
I'm curious, you admonished us to like follow our own path, but I'm curious what tips you can give us as students. When our own perspective is so limited, like how do you as a filmmaker and an activist balance sharing other folks' stories and the importance of like how one story can like impact such like a wide range of representation? I'm just curious for more tips on that.
Yeah, I will say, like, as a creative person, like, part of the struggle, maybe you face this, is, like, having too many ideas and trying to figure out which ones to pursue, right? And that kind of goes along with the timeline thing of not forcing stuff. Like, what feels most natural and most resonant with you at a time, and going for that is a piece of advice I would give. And also, since the election, I just feel like the idea of like not trying to tackle everything and not trying to like take it upon yourself to solve everything and represent every voice is important. Just finding the thing that you can speak most authentically to, I guess. Does that help?
Hi. Oh, whew, talk louder. Hi. First off, thanks for doing the really personal perspective. It was great. You said you grew up in the Northeast. So having come to the West Coast and gone up and down it, these experiences with talking with people, did you do any of that on the East Coast? And do you think that you would have had a different response to the people? And then, do you think the impact would have worked in any different way had you been in Seattle or Portland or LA for what you were trying to present through this film? Or that's a really mixed question. Sorry, I'm like.
Let me take a stab at it. So I didn't do it on the East Coast at all. It was all on the West Coast where people are chill, and then in Austin where people are also chill. So I don't know. I have tried to talk to random strangers in New York about like, what are you listening to? And just like mostly gotten the cold shoulder. So that's the thing. Your second question. Oh yeah, how it would have changed if it was in Portland or Seattle, right? I don't think it would have happened because there's just not, I don't know where I would have found Syrian actors, honestly. Yeah. Thank you all.